It's open! Ah!
I remember the summer of 2023 perfectly, or, at least, I remember the weeks leading up to the incident. I had rented a cheap, isolated cabin deep in the Swan Range, outside Whitefish, Montana. I needed to escape the city, needed true quiet for a massive remote project, and the only connection I had was a weak satellite link. The silence up there was absolute, dense enough to feel heavy, but after a few days, that silence started to feel artificial. It felt like a vacuum waiting to be filled. It was a Tuesday night, close to 3 in the morning, when the power died. Not a flicker, just an instantaneous, dead silence from the refrigerator and the furnace fan. The generator should have kicked in immediately, but it didn't. I walked to the window, holding my phone for light, and peered out into the black woods. That was when I saw the light. It wasn't a searchlight, and it wasn't the moon. It was a vast, inverted bowl of dull, pulsing white, hovering silently just above the tallest pines, maybe 100 yards from the back deck. It didn't hum or roar. Instead, I felt a vibration that wasn't sound at all, but a deep, internal resonance, a pressure behind my eyes and in the center of my chest, like my organs were suddenly too heavy. I stood there, frozen, trying to rationalize it as a military exercise or maybe even a drone, but the sheer scale of the light argued against that. And then, a beam shot down. It wasn't a crisp, sharp beam like a flashlight. It was thick and viscous, almost oily, pooling around the cabin foundation. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light seemed to penetrate my eyelids, burning bright orange behind them. A wave of nausea hit me, so powerful I nearly collapsed. I remember scrambling backward, tripping over a rug, the cold floor hitting my back, and then realizing the cabin door was somehow open. It hadn't just been unlatched. It was wide open, inviting the cold air and that dreadful, silent light inside. The next thing I remember was the sensation of floating. It wasn't gentle. It was like being compressed and stretched simultaneously, then suddenly released into a space that defied physics. I wasn't moving, but everything around me was shifting, liquid, a room of curved, pearlescent material with no discernible corners or seams. The air felt sterile, ozone-heavy. And then I saw them. They weren't the gray figures of folklore. They were tall, easily 7 feet, and utterly slender, almost frail. They weren't wearing clothes, but their skin, if that's what it was a translucent, pale gray, catching the ambient light and reflecting it in odd ways. Their heads were elongated, smooth, and they possessed the largest eyes I had ever seen, vast pools of shimmering black. But the most terrifying thing about them was their hands. They had 6 fingers, impossibly long, and they moved with a precise, clinical efficiency that was agonizing to watch. They didn't speak. They didn't make sounds. They communicated using that same internal pressure, a rush of intrusive thoughts and feelings slamming into my mind. Don't struggle. This is necessary. They didn't examine my body, not in the way I expected. They were focused entirely on my head. 2 of them stood on either side of me, placing those long, cold fingers against my temples. The pressure returned, unbearable this time, and I felt a violation far deeper than physical pain. It was like they were peeling back layers of my consciousness, exposing every memory, every fear, every moment of my life, classifying it instantly. Then came the twist. Instead of taking information, they started showing me things. It was a flood of data, a hyper-realistic, high-speed montage of buildings I had never seen, advanced technology that looked decades beyond our current grasp, and then, a quick flash of what looked like the inside of a massive laboratory. It was too fast to fully process, but I remember focusing on one tiny detail in the periphery of the lab flash, a specific logo, a stylized letter M inside a geometric rhombus. It looked strangely familiar, like something I had seen on a server or an obscure corporate patent filing back when I was working in IT. The whole encounter, the abduction, felt less like a visit from another world and more like a forced, technological data dump, a quick, brutal injection of information followed by immediate, targeted memory scrubbing. Then, the agonizing pressure stopped, replaced by sudden, profound lightness. I woke up on the cabin floor, exactly where I had fallen. The front door was still wide open, and the silence had returned, but now it felt genuinely safe, genuinely empty. The power was back on, too, the generator humming reliably outside. I checked the time. 3 hours had vanished, wiped clean from the evening. For months afterward, I suffered terrible migraines and flashes of impossible architectural schematics running through my mind. I eventually found the courage to look up that strange logo, the M in the rhombus. It belonged to an obscure, privately funded research company based out of Nevada, specializing in predictive logistics and next-generation cognitive mapping. The realization hit me like a physical blow, colder than any alien touch. The terrifying experience in the Montana woods hadn't been an interstellar visit at all. It had been something far more local, far more organized, and infinitely more unsettling. Someone, not something, was using high-level tech to harvest memories, experiment on civilian minds, and disguise the entire, awful process as the stuff of campfire stories. And worst of all, they had left me with a memory of their true identity, a memory that I knew, deep down, they would eventually return to reclaim. I have been watching the skies ever since, but I watched the news even closer. I know they aren't coming from space. They are already here. This happened to me back in late October 2024. I was driving home from a conference in Salt Lake, taking the long route through the desolate, high desert of eastern Oregon. It was past 1 a.m., and the only company I had was the hum of my old sedan and the static-laced radio. It's the kind of road where you go 40 miles between gas stations. The darkness out there is absolute, it feels ancient. I remember thinking how small I was, just this little metal box slicing through an ocean of black nothingness. That sense of isolation was comforting, initially. Then, the comfort evaporated. I noticed the silence first. The static on the radio didn't stop, but the car's engine noise, that familiar, reassuring drone, just dropped. It wasn't sputtering. It sounded muffled, like I was suddenly driving underwater. I checked the RPMs, normal. Speedometer, exactly 65 miles per hour. Logic told me I was tired, imagining things. I told myself it was auditory fatigue messing with my perception of engine noise. But the feeling of being suddenly insulated persisted. That's when I saw the light. Not headlights, and not an aerial beacon. It was low on the horizon, maybe 2 miles ahead and slightly off the road, a soft, pulsing, amber color. It wasn't bright, but it was absolutely stationary and unnatural. My logical mind immediately cycled through options. Farm machinery? No, wrong color, too steady. A brush fire? No, it was too cold and dry, and the light lacked flicker. My foot instinctively eased off the gas. I had to know what it was. I killed the engine and the silence hit me like a physical wave. The temperature dropped instantly. I stepped out of the car, pulling my flannel tight. The air tasted sterile, crisp, and unbelievably cold. The silence of the desert was now a crushing, active force. I stared past the scrub brush, towards the amber light. It was maybe half a mile away now, hovering just above the ground in the middle of a barren field. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a conventional light bulb. It was structured light, defined by hard, sharp edges. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the light wasn't the object, it was coming from the object. The object itself was enormous, silent, and blacker than the night sky. It wasn't round, it was a complex, impossible geometric shape, shifting slightly in the vertical axis. I felt a deep, resonant tremor. It wasn't sound I heard with my ears, it was a sub-bass frequency that vibrated through my sternum, a deep HWM that felt less like noise and more like a massive, focused energy signature. It replaced the silence entirely. The psychological terror didn't come from the size of the object, but the fact that something so immense could be so quiet, yet still make my teeth ache. I wasn't thinking about UFOs, I was thinking about physics being fundamentally broken right in front of me. Then, I saw the movement. It was faint, down near the barbed wire fence line, right between me and the massive hovering shape. Something tall and unnaturally thin was emerging from the scrub, moving with disturbing slowness. It was impossible to judge its distance accurately in the darkness, but it was massive, 7 feet, maybe more. It was completely matte black, absorbing the scattered starlight. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, its limbs articulating in ways that looked painful. It reached the fence and simply stopped. It didn't look at the craft, it looked directly at me. I couldn't see eyes, its head was smooth, polished obsidian, but I felt the intense weight of its focus, like a spotlight aimed solely at my core. This wasn't an aggressive stance, it was analytical. It felt less like a hunter and more like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. That clinical detachment made my skin crawl more than any growl ever could. I was exposed, studied, and irrelevant. And then I saw the detail that solidified everything. On its chest, right beneath where a ribcage would be, 3 tiny, perfect pinpricks of pure, electric blue light sparked into existence, symmetrical and steady. They weren't reflecting light, they were generating it internally. That was the final fracture point of my rationality. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I simply turned, yanked the car door open, scrambled inside, and locked the door. My hands were shaking too hard to immediately get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally caught, I didn't look in the rearview mirror, but I glanced out the side window as I accelerated violently. The creature hadn't moved. It was still standing by the fence, 7 feet of matte black observation, its blue light staring after me. I drove for an hour straight at 80 miles an hour. As I crossed into Idaho, the muffled silence in the car finally broke. The engine noise was back, the radio static crackled normally, and the cold, sterile feeling left. Everything was suddenly loud and normal again. I can't rationalize it. I didn't drink, I wasn't falling asleep. I saw an impossible shape hovering silently over a field, and I saw a figure that looked like a living shadow, generating light internally. The only evidence I have is the missing hour I can't account for, and the persistent feeling that I was catalogued, measured, and then ignored.